Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm your session host, Marcella Coley, real estate appraiser at Coley Appraisal Company and chair of the North Carolina Realtors Appraiser section. First, a few housekeeping items. We have a quick disclaimer. The content discussed today in today's session are the opinions of those individuals and do not represent any association, organization, or board they may be a member. We will be taking live questions today via the chat field. Please submit any questions you have for today's panel, and we will do our best to address as many of them as possible. We will also be recording today, and we will email a link to the recording to each of you. Okay, so let's talk appraisal. I'm very excited that we have a panel of appraisal experts today with us who are going to tell us everything we need to know about appraisals and how they affect your transactions. The North Carolina Realtor Appraiser section has been hosting annual Ask an Appraiser sessions since 2021, and today we continue our conversation with realtor brokers and realtor appraisers to help explain the appraisal process and to demystify what is and what is not allowed when an appraiser is hired for one of your transactions. Before we start, we know some of you will have some very specific questions that are more situational to maybe a one-off scenario. With over 400 attendees today, we are going to take just as many questions as possible, but we will have to prioritize the submitted questions by those most frequently asked and those that will affect the greatest number of realtors. So thank you in advance for understanding. One final note, we will be pasting 2 links in the chat of helpful resources developed by the NAR Real Property Valuation Committee to help agents and homeowners better understand the appraisal process. Please use these links for your future reference. Now, I'd like to introduce today's panel. We are joined by our moderator, Peter Gallo, Appraisal Section Director and owner of Homesite Appraisal, Claire M. Offrance, Appraisal Section Director and founder of Offrance Valuation LLC, Jason Kellum, Appraisal Section Vice Chair and owner of JS Kellum Appraisals, and Dennis Bailey, Appraisal Section Director and owner of Bailey Real Estate Advisors, LLC. So thank you so much again for joining us today, and I am going to let Pete take it away.
Thanks, Marcella. Hello, everyone. Just for today, I'd like to dedicate this broadcast to our good friend, Kim Andre, who we lost last week. She was a great friend to a lot of us at NC Realtors. And so let's just get off. We had a lot of questions come in through registration when everybody was registering. So we're going to start with a couple of those. So to begin, measuring. We had a ton of questions about measuring. So let's talk about how appraisers determine the size of a dwelling. What's ANSI? What's gross living area? How might what an appraiser considers in their report differ from what might be similar to how others approach size, square footage? What might be included or considered when developing an appraisal? What's a bedroom? Unpermitted additions, staircases. If a bathroom has only a shower, is it still a full bath? Things like that. So does anybody want to start off with maybe describing ANSI and what appraisers' standards are for measuring and reporting gross living area? Anybody want to start that? Jason, you want to talk about
well, certainly, without getting specific on most of those things, a lot of things that have changed. And I've had some houses that I've measured previously the old way and the new way. In most cases, it's not very far off. You're measuring the foundation rather than the exterior siding. Typically, you're treating the staircases the same way. The big issues that we're finding with realtors is that that tri-level that only has a foot of dirt on that bottom level that's been a tri-level its entire life, that's now considered a basement. So in MLS sheets, you're wanting to measure that bottom level and say that's included as a basement. it makes it a little difficult when you have the house across the street that's identical and has no dirt against it, and is not a basement. But for the most part, I find that my measurements are not far off what the realtors were already measuring. It is only a few strange cases. Your 7-foot ceilings, your old houses that the top floor has been finished. And I'd be interested to see how all the other appraisers handle those.
So you want to add to that, Claire?
Well, gosh, I don't know what to add to that. That was great, Jason.
Yeah, well, basements. So we did have a lot of questions about basements. So there is, we're appraisers. I mean, we really want to compare apples to apples. So whatever you're doing for the subject, you want to do the same thing. So for the comparables, so when you have like a split level or a split foyer, you want to make sure if you're going according to ANSI and there's one wall has, like Jason explained, is below grade or touching dirt, and so you're considering that lower half basement, you want to do that for all your comparables, right?
Yeah, that's right, Peter. We want to make sure, however, we are looking at our property, we're looking at the comps the same way, because yeah, if we're, if there's a property where the basement is included as, part of the above grade living area, and we're comparing that to a property that does not have that, and we don't realize, maybe, every once in a while they're put in MLS that way, and it can mess up our analysis. So we have to be apples to apples for our analysis to be, credible. And I think another thing with ANSI that I heard a lot of, people were talking about was just the precision of the measurements, and how we have to really, you can't round to the foot and things like that. But I think most appraisers have been doing that. I know that I have, forever, I run my tape along the buildings, and if it's 10.2 feet, I put 10.2 feet. So, that there can be some differences there where, people who are not trained to do those measurements might, round. And so we'll see some kind of different measurements than we might get when we're out at a property.
Just quickly for that, is it for those basements, separating those two basements, that is a lending guideline, not a real estate guideline. So you're obviously, if it's heated, cooled, and fully finished, you're including that in your overall GLA and your room count. We only ask you that on the MLS sheet, that below level, you describe the room count and the size of that, because we are going to be required to separate that from the above grade improvements, even if you use the entire GLA of the home.
Dennis, I know you carry a couple measuring tools.
A few. Well, one thing the change to ANSI for appraisers does is put us more in line with what the Real Estate Commission requires of brokers. We have been required to measure to the 10th of a foot for at least 23 years that I've been back in North Carolina. So it brings it much more in line. That the yellow book that the Real Estate Commission produces is pretty much ANSI standards. It just doesn't say ANSI standards, and that doesn't evoke the requirement to put in an ANSI description of the square footage that you have to do when you say you're measuring to ANSI standards. So that's really the only difference that I see, and the difference between what we do GLA and what brokers do HLA. As long as they've identified it separately, like Jason was saying, it's easy for us to do our jobs. And I think it makes it easier for the broker to see the same numbers come now that we're measuring to ANSI standards.
Right. Well, so there was a question, we're starting to get some questions. There were a couple of questions on solar panels, and I know we're all kind of located in slightly different areas. I'm in Charlotte. You guys are located more towards the East Coast. Well, I know Dennis, you're right around me. But so solar panels and energy efficient items, how do appraisers approach that? Now here in Charlotte, you really need the data, right? You need to get that out of the MLS. So I know from what I've heard in Raleigh they're more kind of focused where their market is actually reacting to solar panels and energy efficient items. And it's documented more. They have their HERS ratings more consistently in their multiple listing systems, where here in Charlotte, we don't really see that much. So there isn't a good gauge for appraisers to go by. And the bottom line is brokers would be reporting it if it was a significant market factor. So how do you guys feel about that, and solar panels and energy efficient items, if you might see that or get a question from somebody on that? Claire, do you want to?
Yeah, well, so you mentioned, we have to look at how the market reacts to various things, right? And so, the ideal is to find a property that's sold with solar panels and maybe compare it to a very similar property that didn't, and see, if there was a premium there. We always like to, especially for unusual features, interview the brokers and ask them. So if you get a phone call from an appraiser saying, I noticed this property had solar panels, and how was that viewed by your buyer? And just, it's up to the appraiser really to figure out, when we're doing appraisals, how these specific features might impact value. And, for us, sales, making matched pairs is what we call them, finding a property that has a feature and a very, very similar property that does not have that feature, and comparing to see, oh, this one sold for, 5 or 10,000 more, or what, I'm just throwing numbers out there, but because, potentially because of this feature. And, we like to find, if we could find multiple matches like that, we'd get a pretty good feel, and could put together a little study that would help us make adjustments. But it's really market dependent. So like Peter said, some areas might, really want a particular feature, and others, it's not really recognized in that market. So.
And that kind of leads towards other unique characteristics or features on a property. And we had a lot of questions about adjustments, how we approach for specific items. But so there's a question about a home that somebody's looking at today that has a 3-horse stable and pasture, and wants to know. Now, I mean, there's a lot of things, a lot of unique characteristics. So how do appraisers approach that? It's really about comp selection, but maybe there might not be comps. Maybe are there other approaches? So Jason, how do you approach when you come up upon a property you have to appraise that has something unique about it that might be a little bit of a challenge?
Yeah, I'm almost always lean towards some type of bracketing, and that means even if I have to go out in time, back in time, and out in because there's a lot of clients that are going to require me to bracket something, that 6-car garage with the apartment over it or something like that. So you're allowed to go outside of your market to try to find one of these items if you possibly do it. Because you can use a market extraction, you can use a cost and depreciation, but those are, even that with linear regression, you're still not getting a picture. You really can't, it's very difficult to find market reaction when you're just doing it in a mathematical formula, because it really doesn't tell you what somebody else will pay for this item. But I've been able to, going back far enough and out in distance, usually to find something that I thought was comparable, even if it wasn't identical, and use that kind of item, then think, well, the market, at least that shows me with land, the house, and the other amenities, this is the value that I can see that somebody paid for that additional amenity, especially when you're dealing with horse farms or very old properties.
Right.
Yeah. And another thing we do, just as a test of reasonableness, is to look at we develop a cost approach too, so say there's a barn on a property, if we talk to some local contractors and we have various, like I've got a Marshall and Swift, it's a cost book that I use. And, we come up with the cost new to construct a barn like that and look at depreciation. And, we can have a feel at least for, it's not going to be worth, more than it's going to cost to add to that property, most likely. So, there are some things we can do like that also as a test of reasonableness, when there's not good data out there, especially.
Right. Well, so Dennis, you're a data guy. So how far back do you go for comps, or how far out, what's appropriate? Again, you're probably gonna answer the question, it depends, right? Oh, you're on mute. You are muted.
Thank
There
you.
go.
It has a lot to do with where you're at, where the comps are, where the subject is, as to how far out you go. I have gone out as far as 30 miles in a rural area trying to find a comp that was anywhere close to a fairly unique property. So that matters a lot as to how you're going to vary. I try my best to keep them very recent. If the market is rolling, 90 days is as far back as I'll use. But if, things are not happening very often at all, if there's not that many sales, then I'll go out a year. And then sometimes, like today, I went back looking for a fairly unique property. I went back 3 years and could find no matches, which means I have to come up with a Frankenstein appraisal.
Okay, anybody else have comments on how far back, how far out?
I've gone 5 years. I've gone several counties over for a log home or something like that. It depends on, a lot of times with us, is with our client, a lot of times they don't care how far back or how far you go. You're probably not going to weight that comp very high. You're just looking to give yourself a pretty good feel for what you're, even if you're going back, because you can compare it to houses that sold at the same time that house sold.
Right.
So that kind of can give you an idea of what it was worth then, and then you project that forward to now.
Great. Claire, anything to add?
No, I think they covered it. I mean, for a strange, an unusual property, you do have to go out, in distance or time, sometimes both. And it's obviously it's ideal to find 5 similar sales of very similar properties within the last month, but that's not always the case. So, we have to do the best we can with the data that's out there.
So we get, Claire, and I'm going to go to you with this. We've been getting a lot of requests from lenders about short-term rentals. I guess there's some unique or some new mortgage products out there that allow consideration for short-term rentals. When it comes to short-term rentals, and we're getting asked from a client, and appraisers getting asked to consider short-term rentals or do a rental analysis for short-term rentals, why is a residential appraiser maybe not fully equipped to complete an analysis? And what do you have to consider in an analysis of a short-term rental?
Well, I mean, so appraisers have to be competent to do whatever, type of appraisal that we're working on. So, I wouldn't say necessarily, if a residential appraiser is competent or not. It just really depend on their, expertise and, if they've taken the coursework and understand, obviously that's above and beyond the typical, residential appraisal where, it might be rented for, on a year-to-year basis or something like that. But mostly just looking at sales most of the time. And so short-term rentals are a totally different beast. And so, yeah, you want to make sure, as an appraiser, we have to make sure that we are competent, to do the work that that we're hired to do. So, yeah.
So you have to consider it's like you said, it's a different animal. So there's furniture, it's more in competition with hotels and that type of, it's more of a business kind of consideration rather than just maybe a 1-year lease of a single family property or 4-family, correct? So you need more sources of information to get that data.
I mean, I guess the answer is it depends. What are they? What's the client looking for? What is the value of this real estate? Is any, because any property could technically be turned into a short-term rental. Or are they looking for an analysis of, what's going on there with that, the actual income stream and for the short-term rental. So, and that can get really complex.
Okay, anybody, Jason or Dennis, you want to comment on short-term rentals at all?
Only that I had a conversation with a buddy of mine that's at the coast 2 days ago, and he had the same kind of problem where they gave him an assignment of a beach house and wanted him to calculate. It was only rented for 4 months of the year. He said he did a lot of research and even sent me some links. And what they look at is like what you just said. You're running a business. You probably want to use a general appraiser. That's something that a residential appraiser should probably just withdraw from that assignment, because we're typically used to doing 12-month rentals. And when you're talking about having to pay for linens to be cleaned, for it to be cleaned after the tenant moves out, things like that, you are running a business. And it's probably outside of your scope to take those. If you're working at the beach, you might have a little more experience in vacation rentals, but like Airbnbs and things like that, you're probably best to just leave it alone and let it go to a general appraiser.
Dennis, anything?
I would pass on the assignment. There's no such thing here, really.
So,
You know.
So how do you have a conversation? That's so you get a call from an agent or a broker, and I don't know, maybe you did an appraisal and they have it in front of them and they want to talk to you about it, whether they're the listing agent or the buyer's agent. What can you talk to them about? Dennis, how do you react when somebody calls you and says, hey, I got this appraisal on my listing that you did, and I just have a couple of questions I want to talk to you about it?
While I would love to talk with you about it, I'm not allowed to. You would need to route any questions that you have through your lender and AMC, because my client was the lender or AMC, and that's the only person I'm allowed to speak with about it after the appraisal has been signed.
But I just have some general questions, Dennis. I just want to know what, I don't know, I just have some general appraisal questions. Is that okay?
Since you called me about a specific report, I won't be answering any questions because you'll try to relate them to that, and that puts me in jeopardy with my client, which I can't do. I apologize. I really wish I could help, but I can't.
Okay. All right. Well, you're more suspicious than I am. I was just trying to get out general questions, appraisal questions you can talk to people about, right? You just can't talk about a specific property. And now, Claire, beforehand, when you're in the process of development or getting, and you, what can you talk to, what are you doing, and what kind of communications are okay maybe before and after?
Yeah, well, so I appreciate any information that a broker wants to pass along. If they've got a list of properties that they like, hey, I want to make sure you don't miss these sales. These are really, I think they're similar. It doesn't mean the appraiser is going to agree. But I mean, the more information, the better, right? We want to be good at what we do. We don't want to miss something. So, in any communication about the property, information about, recent upgrades and, how much was spent, when the work was done. I mean, just anything that would help us better understand the property is welcome.
Okay. Jason, did you have any?
Just quickly, I mean, it's really just the confidential information. There's things about that have nothing to do with the deal, that are just general appraiser questions that I don't have an issue answering. You just have a confidentiality agreement with you, so you can't really release anything that they couldn't find out. But a lot of times, physical characteristics, things like that, you can discuss. But typically, the questions you get are very specific, and you can't discuss those.
So commonly, agents and brokers think that you can't talk to an appraiser, right? So when's the best time really for an agent or a broker to send that information that they think might be relevant, or how should they approach an appraiser? To give any comments on that, Dennis?
When you set up the inspection time, generally.
Yeah.
Well, as a broker, what I do when an appraiser sets up an inspection to go look at the property to appraise it, I drag a folder that I call appraisal into the email and send it to them. And in that, I include all of the comparables that I use to determine the value of the property, and I write on them the reason that I thought they were the best matches for the subject, to compare to the subject. And I include things like the deed and plat and tax cards and things like that. So I give them a load of information about the property. And most appraisers seem to appreciate it. Now, what I do as an appraiser is when I'm setting up the inspection appointment, I send that broker, the listing broker, an email, and I say, listen, if you would like for me to consider some sales that you believe are the best matches for this property, I'm happy to do so. Please email them to me. And I'd appreciate it if you tell me why you thought they were the best match. And I tell them in the email, it doesn't mean I will use it, but it means that I will look at it, consider it, and I will even mention in the report that you sent specific ones to me and why I either chose them or did not choose them.
Okay. So we had a question. Do appraisers use off-market sales as comparables, or are all comparables out of the multiple listing system? Claire, is there a preference? Is anything fair game?
Well, I've heard arguments both ways on that, because, I've heard the argument that if it's not in the MLS, that maybe it wasn't marketed in a typical way, or, that maybe somehow the sale price isn't reflective of what it would be if it had been listed in the MLS. I think it's, appraisers can use those sales, but they do need to do their due diligence to figure out what happened with the transaction. And if it seems something seems amiss, or, it would raise, I guess, a little bit of skepticism, and we'd really need to dig and be sure that that was a good, that it sold for what both parties thought was the market value, and that it didn't, there wasn't some kind of a discount, or anything like that.
But you're searching for everything though. You
Mm-hmm.
don't want to miss anything as an appraiser. So
Right.
you don't want a gotcha moment after you've already submitted the report.
Right.
So,
Right.
So knowing what's going on in the neighborhood is part of your research.
Yeah. If I found a very similar property and it wasn't in the MLS, I would still put it in my report. Even if I thought like there was something a little bit different about it, or I didn't really feel comfortable because I didn't have enough information, I would still mention it. If I thought it was something that was important to the neighborhood, and I would explain how I considered it. We want to find the best data, so that's what we're trying to do. And certainly don't want to miss anything important.
But not everything you see or note or you're considering winds up on the grid in your report.
Yeah, I mean, it just can't, because we look at you'll look through 50 sales to pare it down, so without data dumping the entire MLS into every report, we really can't put everything in there. Right. So we have to pick those that we think are the most similar
so
to
so
use.
One of the things we get, Jason, a lot of times is 3 sales that we didn't for reconsideration after the fact, and we get a handful of sales, and we notice that they're all maybe the top sales in the 5-mile radius of the subject property. Is that something that somebody who wishes to ask the appraiser to reconsider should be doing, or what's the best way to approach a dispute if you have one of these reconsiderations of value after the fact, and I'm a broker and I want to supply the appraiser with some information to maybe have them consider what's the best information that I should provide to the appraiser?
Well, I don't mind looking at the comparables, but it's been my experience, you don't cherry pick by price. I mean, you know what your contract price is, and suddenly I get comparables that all support that price, even though they're in superior neighborhoods. They may be close to the same size, but the lot values or the neighborhood amenities are superior, and they're going beyond 1 mile to find them. So like us, just like when you did your CMA, we're in a market right now where we're looking at the same comparables that you probably looked at to do your CMA. I mean, most things go under contract within several weeks. They're ordering the appraisal within 2 weeks after that. So unless something pops up in that span of time that's brand new, that, you know, indicates a higher value, sending us things outside the neighborhood aren't helpful. But it, you know, as everything else, you want to send us the most comparable properties. The property that you would take your buyer to, if they like this property and it fell through, where else would you take them? Something similar, another similar neighborhood, whatever locational amenity they like, whether it's school district or near where they work, things like that.
Right. And I think that goes along with our role, right? We're not an advocate, right, Dennis? So when you're again, being a data guy, you probably have all kinds of Excel spreadsheets that you get all the data from wherever you can, you try to organize it. It's not about trying to figure out this range. It's about the whole range, right? And considering everything and not being an advocate, trying to develop an unbiased opinion.
Well, that's really the biggest thing, the biggest difference that I explain to brokers a lot is the difference between appraisers and brokers. When I'm doing an appraisal, I work for the truth, period. I'm an advocate for the truth only, no higher, no lower. But as a broker, you're an advocate for the higher price. I listed a property one time after the guy figured out that I sell real estate as well. And he contacted me after I had appraised his house and said, "Hey, would you sell my house for me?" And I said, "Sure." And so he said, "We're going to do it at the 305 that you appraised it at, right?" And I went, No, we're doing that at 320. What? I said, "Hey, if we can drive it up, we're going to drive it up because I'm your advocate as a broker." Okay. And if the appraiser then finds the value, great. If they don't, we recognize that we'll have to come back down to what I could only find the value for. If that's what it comes out to, that's what it is. But we make the attempt as long as I've advised you of that as a broker. And so it's a huge difference between the two professions, is that one, your job is to try to sell it for the most money possible, period. Okay, while preparing your seller for the truth. But as an appraiser, you are proving the value, period. And if it supports the sales price, great. If it doesn't, I hate it. That sucks. But it is what it is.
So that kind of goes along with pressure that appraisers might be put under or feel they might be approached. Jason, are you getting, where do you feel maybe pressured, or are you getting pressure maybe compared to 15, 20 years ago when it was kind of, there weren't as many regulations, appraisal independence? Are you feeling?
I don't. One of the good things that happened out of the financial crisis was that. I mean, one, subprime kind of went away, so you didn't have these just fly-by-night companies calling you, wanting you to pre-comp things, promise all this extra work you're going to get if you can just hit this value. I mean, nowadays they don't, I'm sure someone cares on one end, but the lender itself just wants you to give a credible report. I haven't had pressure from anybody. At the most, you just get a reconsideration of value.
So what about I know when COVID was going on, when it was really an issue, the market was kind of doing crazy things. We saw a lot of nationally just appreciation. It was kind of a straight line up for property values. What are you seeing now, and how are you handling it? Claire, what do you, any anecdotes, any thoughts of anything that you've seen recently that kind of stick in your mind? Hey, this is different now, or maybe it's the same in some circumstances?
Well,
I mean, we used to use time adjustments. Now, how do we, approaching time adjustments is a little different now. Well, the
Yeah.
approach is the same, but what we're seeing them come out to when we do the research is a little different.
Yeah, so it's been weird times, as everyone knows, in the last several years. And for a while there, a couple of years ago, there were, hardly any sales, and then the prices were just, skyrocketing. I think things have stabilized a little bit more. I mean, I'm not seeing that, and we're all seeing, and everybody on this call, is seeing that, things are not selling like they were, within seemed like a couple hours there for a while and stuff.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's, and it varies market to market, obviously. But in my area, it seems like things are stabilizing a little bit more.
Yeah. So when you hear, Dennis, hey, I had multiple offers, does that mean anything to you? What does that mean? Want to hear that?
I do want to hear that, because that causes me to give more consideration, in my mind, that, hey, there were a lot of people that were interested in this property at the listed price. Okay. And sometimes the broker will share the offers, and send the offers to me, to look at. And if there's 9 offers for above list price, that's the market speaking, right? Then is there data there to support it other than the offers that came in? So I do pay attention to that. I think I'd be remiss to not pay attention to the number of, the amount of demand for that property and people that actually made offers and put up due diligence fees.
Anybody else want to? I mean, that's pretty good answer. We're still getting a lot of questions about adjustments, basement height. How do you approach an adjustment for a basement compared to above grade? It depends, right? Claire, depends.
Yeah, it depends. But so I'll go back to the whole matched pair thing that appraisers do. But we can look at a property that has a basement and doesn't have a basement. It has to be a similar property. So of course, if you got a $1 million house with a huge, showroom, amazing basement, you don't want to use the data you get from that for a, $200,000 ranch property. But, you look at similar properties in a similar price point, this is what appraisers do, and try to figure out, how that one feature, affects the value. And, often it's not at the same, the basement does not contribute the same value, just often, not always, at the same price per square foot as the, above grade. So, we have to look at the particulars of a market. How does this market feel about basements, right? and it does vary. Figure out. So that's why we want that area separated out, because we'll have it separately in our grids, the above and the below grade. But it really comes down to, how the market reacts to various features, and us, analyzing that, and there's no simple answer. Unfortunately, there's not a number, that it adds per square foot for a basement, because everybody knows every neighborhood's different. Every, price point, it's going to add a different amount. So it really takes an appraiser who's knowledgeable in a particular market and has done the research on these various features to really be able to make a good adjustment there.
And that, often our clients are asking us to put a round peg in a square hole. And when it comes to something like that, if you get a unique house, maybe a mountain house that's on a slope, you have to approach it differently. You have to approach it the same, but different, right, Jason?
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to a basement, the basement might be it might be part of the house, even though it's on a lower level. But then you run into ANSI and having to break it down into a form, at least for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, if you're doing a conventional form. You are, like you said, Claire, you have to try and find similar properties, and you have to bring it all together in the same way. You have to figure that out so you can
Yeah.
report it to the client. like,
Yeah, and
on it.
similar properties in that market. You might have like a high-end mountain house where, they all have 4 stories and, it doesn't sell for less, just because it's below grade. It's got great views. Everybody loves the basements in that area. So I mean, it really comes down to that local expertise and looking at sales and figuring out what the market's doing.
So we had a question. I saw it before, but it's kind of an issue for appraisers and for the profession, where we hear about 2 appraisals that come in significantly different. And so what's a significant difference when it comes to appraisal? Sometimes what people might think significant isn't really all that significant, but in other times it is. How would that happen? Jason, have you run into that? What might be an answer?
I mean, I've heard agents talk to me about it. I don't know that I've ever had, 2 different appraisals in front of me. It's hard to figure that out. I mean, if I sat there, obviously us as seasoned appraisers, if you gave me 2 appraisals and I went and looked at them and pulled all the sales that both of them used, I could tell you which one I'd be leaning towards, but I can't tell you why they were different. It's possible one appraiser did not look at the sales they should have been looking at. Usually measurement's not off that far. But it's impossible to tell you why 2 different people, without saying one was right and one was wrong. But usually that's the case. One was right and one was wrong.
And it's hard for an appraiser to answer that, right, without doing a review. And then when you start looking at another report, as an appraiser, you have to start, if somebody comes to you saying, hey, can you take a look at this appraisal? They know you're an appraiser. They're coming to you as an appraiser. You really have to be careful, because now you're actually asking, you're kind of being engaged, right, Dennis? I mean, and so you have to okay, what do you do as an appraiser? And so they might not get the reaction that they expect if they start asking you to look at something, right? Because you wind up having to consider USPAP and if you're doing a standard 3 review or what. Go ahead, you can answer now. I'm done asking questions.
Well, reviewing somebody else's work is, first of all, is work. And it creates liability. It involves your E&O insurance. You have to create work files and so on. So I am happy to talk with a broker about generalities about an appraisal. I tell them, don't tell me the address, don't tell me any details. We're just going to talk general appraisal things, right? And I'll talk with them about that. But as far as reviewing one, if they hand me one, I'm going to say, thanks. Yep. And that's about it, because I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to endanger myself to make them feel better about something. I tell them, if you'd like to hire me to do a review, we can do that. But that's just not something I want to endeavor in. It's hard because a lot of times, there's a glaring error, right? And when you have that glaring error, you know what it is, and you tell them, hey, you should get a review done, but I don't want to engage in that. That pits me against someone else. Not my favorite thing. Let's just say that.
And we could probably, if we saw an appraisal, we'd probably figure out what was going on in the appraiser's mind, or see what, like you said, see it. But Claire, we probably don't want to get into that, right? Or we have to be careful.
Yeah, well, so I was going to say, an appraisal is an opinion of value. And, it's not necessarily, one was right and one was wrong. An appraiser, so say somebody came to me, these 2, they're very different. What's going on, and I might have a third opinion that's, in the middle or higher or lower than either one of them. I mean, it's really hard to say. But as appraisers, we, like Dennis said, we can't just look at other people's work and, you know, just off the cuff, like critique it. I mean, that is part of our, that falls under our standards for USPAP, where we have to do, you know, an appraisal review. We'd have to have a work file. You know, we can talk generalities, like he said, about, you know, the appraisal process and things like that. But I can't just, you know, take somebody's appraisal and, you know, I'd really need to go through it carefully. And, you know, if you're asking an appraiser to do that, that's part of their job. They're going to take it seriously and give you a good appraisal review. You know,
Well,
and we have standards we have to follow.
I've had a similar thing recently where it was a refinance, and due to the nature of the loan, they ordered 2 appraisals. I didn't know they had ordered 2 appraisals, but they let me know that after the fact. They did not send me the other appraisal, but they did send me the other or at least indicated what the other appraiser's condition rating was, and they sent me the comparables. This house was, shall we say, well lived in, and every comparable that they sent me was almost a flip. All new countertops, kitchen, stainless steel appliances, and all that kind of stuff. So I know where that went. I never saw the appraisal, but I know, I can tell you their value was higher than my value based on what they sent me and the condition rating. So that does happen. And without me having to review an appraisal or say anything else, I know where the problem is. And most appraisers would if they saw it. But as the other panelists have said, it's a very sticky situation for you to counter another appraiser when you're not, when you haven't been asked to do a review.
So Jason, when you have, let me think how to phrase this. So I want to get a copy of the appraisal. How do I do that? If you did an appraisal on my listing and I want a copy of it, can I call you and have you give it to me?
No, and you wouldn't, and I'm not sure you'd even get it from your buyer's agent. But it's made it it's years ago, I would have a borrower call me 3 months later and go, I never got a copy of my appraisal. Susie doesn't work for that mortgage company. They won't give it to me anymore. Another positive thing coming out of the 2008, 2009 financial, that borrower's required to get a copy of their appraisal. So I don't ever get those calls anymore. But outside of that, the client is the only person we can discuss our appraisal with or get, transmit a copy to. So it's cut and dry as far as that's concerned. So you can beg the buyer's agent, but if they say no, there's no way for you to get a copy of that appraisal.
Okay, well, does it matter who paid for the appraisal? Should they?
Absolutely not. Where the money comes from is it is who contracts you to do that appraisal. That is your client, and all your fiduciary responsibilities are to that client. And most of those, when we accept that, usually that letter of transmittal has things about confidentiality. So you can't even discuss it with the borrower if they decide to call you with it. Everything has to go only to your client unless they allow you to release that information.
Claire, do you want to add to that? You're nodding a lot.
That covers it. Yeah.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
So we're getting a lot of questions about price per square foot. And I know that's kind of, I know we get that a lot. How do you pray, or we get that a lot in reconsiderations. Well, I saw these sales and they sold for this price per square foot. Dennis, why is price per square foot? Is that an approach that appraisers can consider or use or not?
Well, when you're looking at differences in square footage between two properties, the thing I tell brokers when they contact me about general things is, did the driveway get larger? Did the land get larger? All of those things, the development costs, getting utilities to the property, did all of that change? So you can't take it sold for this many dollars per square foot, including the land and all that, and compare and say, okay, so then I should adjust based on that. It's usually a significantly smaller number. And that again is about market reaction. So there is no set standard. I don't use a 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or $90 a square foot adjustment. I look at the market each time. I look at the neighborhood each time and see what the market reaction is towards the differences in square footage.
There's really a huge demand for our list of adjustments. And we probably could make a lot of money if we put it together and just sold it, right? Claire, do you have a list of adjustments that you use?
I wish I did. It would make my life a lot easier, but you know, like I've said a bunch of times, you know, it's going to be different in different price points in different neighborhoods. So, you know, there's not a rule of thumb.
So what's more important, the location, the neighbor, staying in the neighborhood, or going back in time, or staying current, getting your most recent sales? How do you approach that if you're trying to make decisions and you're looking at data? What do you want? Now, we just got through talking about COVID and what's going on in the market. So depends, right?
So ideally you have sales that are in all of those categories. You know, they're recent, they're in the same location. That's what we're looking for. You know, those are the best sales. And so, you know, I don't know, it's really you know, a little bit of it's a judgment call. If there's not that, you know, good, you know, availability of comps. And I think you probably want to look both ways. You know, you'd want to look back in time and then also out in other areas and just really, you know, appraisers are, you know, we're taught to bracket things, right? So, you know, we want to find maybe something that's bigger and smaller. You know, we don't want our property to be the largest, you know, larger than all the comps that we're looking at. And so, you know, it just comes down to what's credible, you know, and we're trying to find the best data that will help us have credible opinions of value. So,
And
yeah,
you're painting a picture for your client. So you might not get exact copies of when you come to the comparables as your subject, but you're trying to, if you don't have that, then you're trying to kind of pick things here and there, get something recent, get something local, something with the same external issues that might affect the property as your subject.
yeah. And the more unique a property is, the more comps I tend to use too, just, you know, because there are not, you know, it's not a simple answer. So yeah, it's not, as everyone knows, it's not always easy to, you know, figure out value on properties.
Okay. Dennis or Jason, any comments?
That's a good answer.
I mentioned earlier about having to do a Frankenstein. And what I mean by that is that there's just no such thing. Like one that I'm doing now is built in 1950, has a detached garage, a carport, and a pool. Well, there aren't many pools in Cleveland County. They're just not, right? And houses built in the, you know, in the 50s and 60s that have pools are definitely limited, you know. So what I had to do is I do basically 3 different searches. I do one that's just for houses with pools. I do one that's, you know, close in that neighborhood and, you know, and close in square footage for that, you know, defined neighborhood, right? You know, then I looked for, you know, differences on garage and carport and things like that. And so I put in, that's why I end up with multiple comparables in there. So I'm trying to, and I don't say, hey, comp number 1 is the best comp. I say a combination of comp 1 and 2 or comp 1, 2, and 3 are the best comparables, because there's no such thing as a duplicate for this house. So this is the best facsimile I could create.
Okay.
And another thing appraisers do is, you know, look at previous sales of the subject property. I mean, that can be a really great indicator. You know, say that his Frankenstein property was just, you know, just sold last year. You know, he could look at that and see what that sold, you know, in comparison to other kind of more typical properties in the neighborhood. So we really have to look at things from many different angles. And those, yeah, the Frankenstein ones take a long time to give us a comfort level. to give an opinion.
Right. So Jason, what's the difference between, I just redid my kitchen, upgraded the kitchen, or added an addition, put on an addition to a house, versus my roof was falling apart, or my roof was really at the end of its life and I replaced the roof. My windows needed to be replaced, so I replaced them and I spent all kinds of money on that. What's the difference between
Repairing and remodeling.
I guess, so how would you?
Yeah, if you're replacing systems that need to be replaced, because a lot of people will say that, and I was like, well, I'm going to be looking at comparables, and most of those, yeah, it's difficult with a roof because in a lot of cases, unless the agent has told you that roof replaced in 2020, you don't know the age of all the roofs of all your comparables. You can see the photos and have a pretty good idea whether something's getting to the end of its estimated life. Luckily, we've been in it's so much easier now because we have lived in a world of flips now, for almost a decade. So those are almost the easiest comps to find, the ones that are, remodeled kitchens, remodeled baths versus kind of as is, well maintained, have been repairing the house over the years, but still dated carpet. Maybe they replaced their dishwasher, but not all the appliances. We can see in those, as I say in our local board, photos, because you're not going to describe a lot of those things, but I can tell the difference between ceramic tile and vinyl flooring, between granite and laminate countertops, old fixtures and things like that. And that's generally, there's enough market data for us to pretty much find a house that's similar to yours, one that's nicer than yours, and one that really has hardly any updates. And that's how we extract those adjustments.
So is there a best return on investment? Where should people put their money as appraisers? Do you have an answer?
I think kitchens and baths are always the big thing. When people ask me when I'm out there, I was like, I maintain the exterior of your home, because I have gone into a lot where LVP flooring and the inside's all beautiful, but they haven't touched that outside in 15 years. And that doesn't help either. Then you just do have a Frankenstein house, something that needs a roof, needs some rotten windows, things on the outside, but the inside is immaculate because they just went in there and remodeled the entire interior.
And that's kind of what we do, right? We walk in, it's not so much, part of what we do as human professionals, rather than just the automated valuations and just considering data, is we go and we touch and feel the property. We're looking, right, Claire?
Right.
It's a whole thing.
Yeah. And that, that human touch too goes to, when appraisers are calling, sometimes a broker will get a call from appraisers saying, hey, I'm looking to use this property as a comp. Can you tell me about it? What was the condition like? What was the interest? And you'll hear, one time I called someone and she said, oh, there was a woman living there and she had been chain smoking in that house for the last 20 years and everything was yellow and and it really affected, everybody had to go in and all the buyers were thinking they had to gut the house, and that was something that was not in the MLS, and that's just a real, it really did affect what that particular property ended up selling for. So, having those conversations, or, seeing the properties ourselves to really get a feel for them. Yeah, I don't really think, unless there's some way, unless all that stuff gets keyed into a computer, that can be picked up on those automated models.
Yeah. And that, Dennis, when you're using all your measuring tools and you're going around the house, what else are you doing when you're measuring a house? You're not just measuring, right? That's forcing you to do other things to get a sense around.
I'm looking at how well it's been maintained, if there's any cracks in the foundation, if there's peeling paint, if the windows have been replaced, if the grade is appropriate for the house, if the grade is slanting towards the house, so there's probably water infiltration. All those things are being looked at as I'm walking around the house and measuring the house. So I wish it was just go out and use my lasers, bing, bang, done. I'd be done a lot faster than I typically am.
Yeah. Okay, well, so I think we're wrapping up. We're at our hour point. So thank you all. I'm going to turn it back to Marcella. Marcella, any comments or you want to add anything?
Am I back?
You're-
I'm back. I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Peter, Claire, Jason, and Dennis for joining us. And also to all the participants, everyone who is logged in for this seminar. We really appreciate your time too. And we have a 5-question survey in the chat box. If you all would do us a favor and fill that out for us, it will help us in the future in doing more of these Ask an Appraiser type seminars. So again, thanks to everybody for your time, both the panel and the participants, and have a great day.
Thanks.